world leaders are at war. Much of Europe, North America and even Asian leaders are fighting to the death, and this conflict would see over around 1,400,000 casualties. Global conflict, more modern firearms, weaponry, cannon fire, battleships. Land and at sea war would be raged. However, I'm talking about World War Zero. This is the 7 Years' War. Long before the First or Second World War in the 18th century, a global conflict occurred. Many consider it to be the first global conflict, hence World War Zero. I'll be taking you on, quite briefly short actually, 5-part series, looking at how the war started, the events of the war, the battlefields, the turmoil, the political chaos, and the deaths, and then the aftermath of the conflict. This is the 7 Years' War, World War Zero. Hope you enjoy the series. We're now arrived at the 4th part of the series, and hence where the series gets its name from, World War Zero. The 7 Years' War was fought on 3 continents of Europe, Asia, and North America, not to mention the Caribbean. This truly was a global conflict. In fact, it was Winston Churchill himself who coined the phrase World War Zero. In this video, I'll be taking you through some parts of the 7 Years' War, mainly the only bits that happen in North America and India, that part of the conflict, as we go through each of the sections we're now looking at. Source the link down in the description. Let's begin. By the year 1756 and the 18th century, the idea of empire and global expansion was well on the cards for all European powers, and notably, the idea of warfare not just being on the standard battlefield, but also elsewhere in the world, so of course you have to maintain and defend an empire, could prove vital in winning a war. At the end of the day, why waste your time in Europe really trying to beat the main march all the way to Paris if you're a British man? You can simply just go over to Quebec or Newfoundland and simply punch the French back there, have huge economic and social losses, colonise that land, amass your own wealth, resources and population, and win the war that way. Of course, this idea of empire and imperial tactics of warfare would go on to dominate the rest of they're still used today, aren't they? One of the key battles of this example was the Battle of Fort Niagara during the 7 Years' War, which landed itself in 1759 between the 6th and 26th of July. By the way, up on screen now are the people who were involved in this war. I can't pronounce their names for the life of me. I'm going to try. One was a prisoner of war for the French side who was Pim Pure and Daniel anyway, yes. And to be fair, the Native Americans easy to pronounce, of the Cherokee tribe, Sanyu Quantlata. I think that's something easy to pronounce. It's all on the screen, you've already seen it. I don't want to make any mistakes. And then the British, and one of them was killed in action, John Pendux and William John. My handwriting's terrible. They're on the screen, you've seen them. That doesn't matter, this is a history lesson, not an English lesson. And Battle of Fort Niagara was actually immortal in a film which actually had Pierce Brosnan in it, a James Bond. James Bond's amazing, he's not even a spy, he was also in the 7 Years' War before that. History and James Bond coming together, I'm getting sexually excited. Anyway, Battle of Fort Niagara was a decisive British victory over the French, and not only saw a whole 1,786 French against, of course, the lot slaughtered 3,945 British and Native American allies, the Native American and the British winning, but it secured British territorial control further from the original 13 colonies territory, and would ultimately see them expand right up to the Mississippi River, as I'll show you in the video. A map of that territory will change, and Quebec would soon later fall by the end of the 7 Years' War entirely to the British Empire, and the Spanish were also making their own advances, their own gains in on the Texas region. For what that would be the mid. Don't know American geographical term, that is the south. Well, it's the southwest anyway. And that was Battle of Fort Niagara. You can still visit it now, I highly recommend it. But ultimately it was a siege of a fort. There were some land battles. Ultimately Native Americans proved very vital in not only intercepting messages in their own native languages, so the French couldn't understand it, but also very, very fast on their feet, very good with spears and as it proved musket fire, and would attack from the tree line, as typically the French around Fort Niagara would have to march through a sort of dipped valley, and the Native Americans were in the trees, and the British there as well, of course, and they could also fire their cannons down on the French from the top. So it was quite an easy battle for the British and Native Americans to win. However, the 7 Years' War also extended into India. Now, at this point, the British East India Company was by far the richest company in the world. I mean, to this day, that company amassed to, in modern terms, about 15 to 20 trillion pounds in terms of the actual wealth it created, all up until 1858, when of course it was incorporated into the British Crown proper. And France did not like this. The only French main holding in India was Pondicherry, and of course the Portuguese had Goa. At this point, it was the rest of India was right up to the British East India Company, and local Mughals and Muslim and Hindu tribesmen and their own local kingdoms, chieftains in India. As a result, between the 4th of December 1760 and the 15th of January 1761, the British Empire decided that they were going to, in this 7 Years' War operation, they were going to take Pondicherry from the French, so not only bring morale the feet for them, but also they could stop them having any more expansion into Asia. This was the main port for them in Pondicherry in India for them to trade with, so it would also monopolise on trade for the British Indian Company, not the French, and not to mention it would also kill a fair few number of French troops, and also, putatively, divert troops away from France to Pondicherry and leave Britain's ally Prussia and later ally Russia when the third decided to join the conflict to invade or attack France. So a lot of strategic planning went involved in this. The British, again, of course, like I said, victory led by Ian Cook against the French, led by a very ironic British name of Thomas Arthur for the French, were defeated. Exact figures on casualty losses I can actually find it very hard to come by. Basically, it was a naval bombardment, and the British then had a landing assault on it, and it did fall to Britain. And by 1763, on the global scale, India was firmly in the hands of the British and their allies, and again in North America's case, Spain was also expanding its own territorial goals, and the British and Native Americans were also winning on that front. And by 1763, this is what the map of North America looked like. An absolutely huge gain for Britain and taking over many, many lands, notably the Ohio region, full of a lot of rich natural resources and water. So that was it. At the end of 1763, the 7 Years' War did come to an end. However, it is the next video I'll be discussing the peace treaties afterwards. This was by far the largest war of the day at the time. And of course, a lot of number of battles, hence why there's got the word mixed up there, of over around 1,400,000 casualties at the time, with the Prussians and the French making up the lion's share of 180,000, 200,000 casualties respectively, the British Empire making around 160,000 casualties, Holy Empire 140,000, the Russian Empire 120,000, and even the Swedish losing a whole 28,000, as not shortly after, following the Great Northern War, 7 Years' War, Finland was of course annexed into the Russian Empire, and Sweden, if anything, during the 7 Years' War particularly, greatly lost its siege, even the middle power, and by the 19th century it was at the back burner of European politics, again showing the true extent of the 7 Years' War. It was not just British and French empires, it was also Sweden and all the other countries, and even Native American tribesmen getting involved. And that is it. The 7 Years' War on a huge global scale. Many lessons can be learned from it. Ultimately, it was called, like I said, the idea of having an empire and trying to imperialistically, militaristically, and economically gain global hegemony, which clearly in 1763 the British had won, and a period of Britannia would now occur for the next 151 years until 1914. As a consequence of this idea of having a global conflict, it showed that ultimately these huge figures at the time of over 1 million and 1,400,000 casualties wasn't going to go away. Warfare was now not so much on the battlefield as it was psychological and on a global scale and in the sea. It was about winning battles by thinking outside the box, ultimately committing some very bad atrocities, and also getting to the border of other countries around the world. And also, unfortunately for Asia, India and later parts of Africa, no one could escape European conflicts and territorial expansion or warfare. Thank you for watching this video. The conclusion to part 5 of this video of the series will be in the final episode 5 of the 7 Years' War series, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching.